want me to be gathering this information? Or what are some ways in which I could be gathering this information? Jot down like any ideas that come to your mind. We need to know if the kids are learning and if they're learning what they're supposed to be learning. So how are you going to manage me to do that? What are some things you're going to want to make sure that I do? So I interpret this in two ways, and then I'd like you as managers and me to see if there's something I'm missing. The first thing I'm thinking when I'm asking myself this question is something I already asked before I went into the observation, which is like, is this objective right? If this is something that's supposed to be taught to third graders, and Jessica's teaching it to seventh graders, then we have probably a problem that we need to talk about, and I have a solution already to what could be holding her students back in high achievement. The second thing I need to know is like, as an observer, when I leave this classroom, do I know like if kids really learn? And what that's going to take me doing is actually getting up out of my CMA seat, either with my computer or without, and going over and looking at student work, right? Like approximately how many kids got this right, so that when I leave the classroom, I know actually kids got it or kids didn't, because that's going to be crucial to me figuring out what Jessica is or isn't doing that's holding students back. It could also look like me asking kids, what are the steps to making mixed fractions of tiles? Can they tell me the key points of that teacher's lesson? If not, then we probably know something happened and it shows the material that helped them pick that. Is there anything that people in this room came up with that you want to make sure that I, as a CMA, did that I did not just state that I had done in this classroom? Manina.
Write down teacher questions and student responses to those questions.
Okay, great. She said write down teacher questions and students' responses to those questions, because it's so fascinating, I think, when you're teaching, how much you miss, right? Like, I feel like even when I'm facilitating, when someone's asking me a question, I'm like half listening because I'm half worried about what I'm going to say next, and thinking about the session, and I think teachers do that too. And so it can be really powerful if you said, you actually asked this question, and here's what Juan and, Jack said in response. Okay, anything else? Yes, and what's your name? Alexa.
I think also taking note of what students are saying. Maybe you're visiting with another student and two students in the back are having a conversation. What are they saying to each other about the work?
Yeah, so like student, what you said is like student conversations that maybe you overhear as an observer that the teacher didn't have information or didn't have privy to listening, okay? So bottom line at this point, I need to know, are kids learning? And if not, whatever I can gather in the lesson that indicates what they're not learning is going to be helpful to me as I head into this conversation and as I develop a theory of what's holding this teacher back. So to go back into the Jessica example, in this case, when I was in there, I did walk around the classroom, and my general sense right now is that about between 50 and 75% of the kids actually likely did not master this objective. And the reason I'm thinking that is because about 50 to 75% at least were not actually even using the tiles to make mixed fractions. They weren't even practicing the skill of doing it. So I'm obviously going to have to ask Jessica some questions in our conversation because she was in there longer than I was, but I'm leaving the classroom with the assumption that kids probably didn't master today's lesson. Okay. All right. Next slide. Can someone read it for me, please?
To decide which of the teacher's challenges is probably the biggest deal, I must consider those challenges in a logical order. The TAL rubric can help me do so.
Thanks, John. Okay, so even though I said this is not a checklist, there is sort of, as Sarah said earlier, a more logical and less logical way of thinking. And we have TAL, which I think really helps CMAs in this process because it is sort of like a menu of teacher actions, right? Like, you don't have to pull out of thin air, CMA, me, not you. You don't have to pull out of thin air the things that teachers do. We actually have outlined that for performers. The thing that TAL doesn't do is say, CMA thinks about this TAL action, then this TAL action, and then this TAL. It doesn't do that for us. And so you're going to want performers to start, or CMAs to start with a couple questions more towards the beginning of their thought process. For example, the next two slides. Someone read it.
Does the teacher know whether students are or aren't learning? If not, this could be a problem with checking for understanding, or it could be a problem based in the teacher's understanding of what student mastery should look like.
Okay. The reason this is so important sort of early on is twofold. One, if the teacher actually doesn't know what she's looking for or what mastery looks like, then she's probably not teaching you. And this happens a lot, for example, in reading, right? Like, do you really know what it looks like for 8th graders to make a high-level predictions? If not, you're kind of probably teaching to some really 2nd grade level of what a prediction is, and we're going to need to talk about that because it's affecting the rigor of your lesson. The other sort of way I interpret this question is, if the teacher does not know that kids didn't learn, then when we sit down and talk about, you know what, Jessica, how did we get here? She actually doesn't know where here is. She doesn't even know that kids didn't learn. And so she can't think like, well, if kids didn't learn, how must I be contributing to that? So I just want to know, do you think, Chrissy, to yourself, think Aloud's are tricky. Do you, Chrissy, know, like, does Jessica know if kids learn? So going back into that example, my guess, just in knowing Jessica, is that she probably has a sense after that lesson that kids didn't learn today. And the reason I'm thinking that is just because I can see that she's recognizing that kids aren't doing stuff, and she's kind of doing little things like standing near them or trying to get them redirected, but it's not working. And so I have a hunch that when we start our conversation, Jessica's going to probably know that kids didn't learn. Again, we'll have to revisit that, but that's what I'm assuming as a CMA right now. Okay, so now that I know that, the next question to ask myself, can I go to reader, please?
Next, I need to find out if the students aren't learning or aren't learning as much as they should be. Is this because their teacher has some planning weaknesses?
Okay, so does the teacher have planning weaknesses? Why am I thinking of this so early in the process? And this is sort of a low-level question, but let's just state it.
First thing you have to do.
It's the first thing you have to do, right? Like, if Jessica's plan is bad, I guess, or not good, then it kind of shapes the way I go into her classroom, right? Because I can look at other things, but bottom line, if she's not good at planning yet, and this is something we kind of like beat into everyone at Institute, and I think for good reason, but if Jessica's not good at planning, then we can kind of stop there, right? Like, it's sort of like, it's not good that the former can't plan, but it does make this process easier for the CMA because it's like problem solved a little bit, right? Like, we need to focus on planning. And we can still go, we still do the classroom, it's not like you're playing so bad, I'm not even going to observe you, right? Because actually I can observe you and show you how this is impacting your students. Like, because you didn't have a plan, here's specifically what I observed, and then that helps you make a really strong link for them to show that, like, this is why this is not good. In Jessica's case, kind of like, unfortunately for me, the CMA, it's not planning, right? Like, we know that her lesson was BP, and on paper it looked amazing. And in practice, maybe less than what she probably would have wanted it to be. So with Jessica, I have to kind of like keep thinking aloud to myself. Okay? All right, next. I get a reader.
Next, I consider if gaps in student learning don't seem to be based on planning weaknesses, and what other ways it could contribute. Has she or he established an environment conducive to learning? Is she or he executing his or her lesson plan well?
Okay, so I feel like from here forward, my thinking process is where like it's gonna get a little bit trickier, right? Like, even in presenting, I'm like, this is a little harder. Okay, so, or in thinking aloud. So I want you to take like a minute to yourself right now and write down. So we know it's not planning, but now we have to think about from the observation we were just in, which is small, and it's really, not much longer when you say for the whole time. What are some things that you're just thinking? We're at this like sort of multi-pronged fork in the road. We have the CAL rubric, so we have that menu of teacher actions. Take like 1 minute to jot down what actually might be holding Jessica back because we know it's not planned. And the list of TAL actions is on page 7 of your SD handbook.